This is Future Sense Now, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. Future Sense Now is brought to you by the Futures Forum. Stay tuned for a journey to the future with host Dr. Claire Nelson.
Greetings and welcome to Future Sense Now, an online e-magazine of the Futures Forum. It is May 2018 and this month we're celebrating World Telecommunications and Information Society Day. And the theme of this day is enabling the positive use of artificial intelligence for all. Ooh, scary stuff. Artificial intelligence. Well, in recent years we've been hearing so much about the significant progress in AI technology made possible by the tremendous advances in fields such as big data, machine learning, computing power, and so on and so on and so on. And we're also hearing that this could be good for us humans because such applications can be used to help people lead better lives by improving healthcare, education, finance, agriculture, and a wide range of other services. The theme for this year is supposed to allow countries and organizations and members of civil society to focus on how AI can help accelerate the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Or, from my perspective, maybe not. Is there another side to AI, the future we fear? Well, in this segment, I'm delighted to have as my guest Alexandra SONSINO, and I'm sure she'll correct me if I spelled or corrected her name wrong. And she is from DesignSwarm, and she will help us to talk about these issues. So welcome, Alexandra. How are you?
I'm very well, Claire. Thank you for having me.
So, folks, Alexandra is all the way in the UK, I believe, or Italy, or somewhere in Europe. So if you see that delay, it's because we're dealing with the technical challenges of transatlantic AI communication. All right. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. The idea of artificial intelligence was first brought into my consciousness in a rare way through movies such as I, Robot and Star Trek. And at that point, it seemed like really just science fiction. But the fact is, we've been living with AI for some time now. Those of us who get used to calling, pressing the button, waiting for some machine to tell us what to do next, that is a form of AI, and we've gotten used to it. So tell me, from your perspective, is AI a tool for human betterment, or is it the future of Star Trek? Which is it? Which is real and which is not?
Well, I think that as with every technology and every advance in technology, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle, which is that, of course, depending on where you use it, computing power can be used in all sorts of ways. So artificial intelligence, I think, is a term that people are using now to really just describe a mass computing power. So we talked about big data for many, many years. And we now are trying to solve this big data issue with artificial intelligence and machine learning, because we think, okay, well, we have all this information and now what can we do with it? And it translates into little bits of everyday automation. So you described really well what happens when you start to automate the services that we might have, used a person for. So I would like to speak to such and such a department. I would like to complain about such and such a service. Okay, now everything is being done by basically a computer that hears my voice, understands what I mean, and then gives me a service back.
Well, Alexandra, let me ask you something. Because one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to you is because of your role as a product designer. You are an expert in industrial design and technology. You have a company called Tinker London, which is a UK distributor of Arduino. And you're also very remote in product design per se. And indeed, I guess the idea of being DesignSwarm is thinking about maybe, I guess, a swarm designer. You can talk to us more about that. But one of the issue is UN Agenda 2030 is talking about addressing challenges of poverty and hunger, inequality among countries, peaceful, justful, inclusive societies, protecting human rights, gender equality, empowerment of women and girls. How is ICT and AI affecting that? And how is your work as a technology producer or designer looking at the connections, connected technology? How do you see that being a part of this move towards improving human lives?
Well, I think it depends on what you think of as improving human life, because one of the biggest challenges of AI is this reduction in job opportunities. So if the objectives long term are to be able to educate more people and hire more people in jobs of, a variety of employment opportunities and kind of get people to move up the social ladder and all of these kinds of things, right now, a lot of computing power is put towards the cutting down of job opportunities and the stripping of anything that looks like repetitive work. And I think that's the biggest challenge for AI. This is why a lot of concerns have been voiced by the likes of, great scientists and even people who are in the kind of pure sciences to say, well, this is all great that we can do more with computers, but actually we're doing less with people. And I think one of the biggest challenges that faces a technology sector is to try to retrain people who might have had the jobs that we are now replacing by computers. So ICT as a sector is actually in a really kind of difficult position of having to justify why we're losing so many jobs, either to people who are going to be very poorly paid for those jobs, and I think of the Amazon workers in factories, but also the people who, the wealth is going to people who understand how to do social media management and who understand how to do programming and who understand the bricks and mortar of the technologies that are being built. This is a pyramid with the wealthiest and most educated at the top, programming and participating in the design of new services and being entrepreneurial and building the unicorns that we see on the front page of the FT. But at the bottom of the pyramid are the people who are actuating those services, or the people who are actually losing jobs to those services. And I think that's a really great challenge. And I don't think that necessarily the answer comes from retraining everyone to know how to code. I think it's about finding new opportunities to employ people completely differently than what we would have normally done. I live in England. I've lived here for 11 years, and we have completely lost our manufacturing sector. I think this is something that the U.S. shares a little bit of. And that anxiety of trying to, help people who have lost their jobs in mining and manufacturing, help them see a future with a more and more technology-enabled space that is basically there to cut their jobs off even further and their opportunities even further. It's really a really great challenge.
Let me ask you a question. Your company is focused on the power of connection, right? And when we first met, what intrigued me about your work was this idea of, I've been hearing for so long about the Internet of Things, right? And we're talking about ICTs for agriculture, ICTs for health, and all these things that it can be good at, right? So yes, say, okay, we're going to lose some work, but now we have this new technology that can help provide healthcare and all these things. So as you think about Internet of Things and connectivity, I know one of the things you're working on is a certification mark for products. Tell me a little bit more about how that works and how that ties in to this idea of AI and ICT being just a fundamental part of the way we live our lives.
Well, I think that one of the things that I've been trying to do with my work in the world of IoT, which is very much a kind of old world meets new world, old product design, industrial design, the old methods of making things around the world, connecting them to the internet and connecting them to connectivity. the challenges there are huge. And one of the challenges that we're looking at with the Open IoT Mark is the challenge of basically not selling people stuff that they don't need, that they won't be able to use because the product will get hacked, or that they will have problems using in the long term because the space is so volatile and companies come and go so quickly. And so there's no, right now, it's a sort of, especially with this meeting between traditional ICT, which would have been what happens behind a screen, whether it's a computer screen, a laptop, or a mobile phone, and the world of physical products, there's no blueprint for how to do things right. And so people have built connected thermostats, connected products, connected everyday appliances, and they've applied best practice in some cases, and in most cases not particularly best practice. And so the Open IoT Mark, which is a project that I'm steering, is an attempt to say, how can we get everyone to do the right thing and make things more secure, encourage recyclability, encourage repairability, and encourage a consumer experience that isn't crappy, frankly.
Well, you know, because I'm thinking about this. I just got a Fitbit, right?
Yeah.
And so part of, I mean, I've been using it for the last 2 weeks, and I'm saying, well, good, I'm going to learn about keeping myself healthy. But my other side of my brain is thinking, like, where's my data going? It's a machine that's attached to my body that's kind of tracking everything I'm doing. Explain to me what I'm doing, because I don't really know what I'm doing. What am I doing here?
Well, I mean, this is...
hack into my Fitbit, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the real challenge, which is that people are buying more and more into this idea that everything is measurable. Most wearable devices aren't particularly accurate around your activity. They'll be inaccurate to the tune of 30 to 40% sometimes. Wow. So even when it's measuring a step, it's sometimes not really measuring a step. It's sort of measuring a half step. And so already they're kind of inaccurate. And then the data goes where? Is that completely clear or not? Do you have any way of actually taking back your data once you decide that you've had enough, and maybe you give the product away to a niece or a nephew or a son or a daughter, or you sell it on eBay? Is there any way for that product to be reset and to have a factory reset? Is there a button on the side of the product that lets you do that? Most products don't. And so most products end up still retaining this kind of ghost piece of data about you that then the company can choose to sell to whoever and use for whatever. And so it's a really problematic space because, especially with wearables, where you're really talking about personal data. Sometimes, you know, a thermostat is not maybe that personal, but a wearable product is very personal. It's your location. It's often your heart rate. It might be your glucose levels. It might be the steps that you take in the activity that you have every day. And all those pieces of information could help someone who, you know, might not be so nice, take advantage of that information, but also the company to sell that information on to insurance companies, to target you even further, or to up your premiums because they know you're not doing as much exercise as you should. And so there's a whole kind of layer of data that gets created about people with the things that they think initially are quite exciting.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. So this is actually giving me a little food for thought. So yes, on the one hand, then, as we think about the Fitbit, then as a piece of AI, because it is somewhat intelligent, isn't it, or is it dumb? Would you consider a piece of AI kind of ish, or is it just a dumb sensor? What is it?
Well, often the artificial intelligence doesn't necessarily happen on the edge, let's say, so at the device level. It might be that it's a service that's being, you know, put together on top of that data somewhere else. So somewhere else, someone is gathering information about people of your age, Claire, of your background, of your location, and your socioeconomic background, if they can find that, and going, well, we can see that most people are doing this, and we can start to kind of gather information and gather a little bit of intelligence around what people are doing who are aged X and live in this part of the country. And so the intelligence and the artificial intelligence kind of happens afterwards. It happens when you are dealing with this idea of big data. So it's not only your device, but it's collectively all the different consumers and all the different customers of the device.
Got you. Well, that helps me to clarify, because some of us, I think, are bewildered as to at what point it moves from being a sensor to being a data point to being an intelligent ecosystem, and so that helped me to think through it out. So to come back to this bigger question then about the future of AI, ICT, and the Internet of Things, which is your space that you're working in, how do you see then a mark like what you're thinking about and product design being able to support, let's say, healthcare, since we're talking about healthcare, and they're saying we want AI to be helpful to humanity for healthcare. What kind of things would have to happen for it to be the case that is helpful without the negative parts of it which are harmful?
So the approach that in Europe people have taken, and so far the UK is still part of Europe, is something called the General Data Protection Regulation, which comes into play on May 25th of 2018. And this is a data protection law that basically makes it impossible for someone to not own their data. And not be able to immediately ask someone who might be a service provider what the data is that they have about that person. They have the right to archive and delete it away from that vendor. And I think that when it comes to healthcare data, that's really important. It means that you can figure out who kind of owns things about you. I think that contributes to people feeling more confident when someone does want to use your data because they want to do research, or they're trying to identify through massive amounts of big data around, people's cancer biopsies, for example. They're trying to figure out, what is a malignant kind of shape look like, and we're going to use tons of people's information about this. And actually we now with this law have a mechanism to talk to consumers about that piece of information. It's not done behind our backs, it's kind of done in the open. It's done really straightforwardly, and I think that can create a relationship between a healthcare provider and whether that's a private one or a public one, and a consumer and a patient, to say, actually, I would quite like my information to be cross-checked with people from other countries and people who I think might be suffering from the same thing somewhere else. And so this liberation to a degree of personal information when it comes to healthcare is really tricky. It's really tricky to get right. But if there's a legal framework like GDPR in place, it does make that conversation clearer. And it means that abuse is less likely to happen. And people can feel more confident about participating into something like IBM Watson and all those kinds of big data services that are just trying to skim through loads and loads of information to identify, what cancer looks like in all its varieties of shapes and forms. I think that, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, there's something that's popped into my head when you talked about the insurance companies. Do you think it's possible that insurance companies could, like, in the next 10 years, actually require to get insurance that you have some sort of a sensor? You think that could be, especially if you have a law like this? I mean, the flip side of it is that the law says, okay, now you have to get access to your data. So now can insurance either compel you to do it or charge you less? Now, for example, now we have this. So could that be a potential flip side of this?
Yes, absolutely. So the flip side, which I've described for a few years now, is essentially those who can't afford higher premiums end up putting sensors and everything in their homes and on their bodies, because that gives them the lower premium because they can prove good behavior in a particular way or a particular type of behavior. And that's really difficult. I don't necessarily think that GDPR makes that easier. Because of course most European healthcare is publicly funded, so it exists within an infrastructure that is completely different from the U.S. Within a U.S. marketplace, let's say, of data and information and healthcare, it's very hard right now to obtain your data. And to obtain your data away, even from an operation you've just had, from experience from friends of mine, they tend to give this back to you in a CD, which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, this is 2018 and people are burning CDs in hospitals with your data because it's seen as a safer way than email, for example. And there's an interesting kind of opportunity there, which is to say, well, what does my profile look like? And also, how can I shop around the best insurance? Because maybe the insurance I'm on is a bit crap, and the insurance that my employer has, and we have copay and all those kinds of things, it's actually the most expensive that they could get. And for my profile, I think I'd like more coverage or less coverage, and I'd like to be able to compare that to people who have my chronic illness or my condition. And right now, that's not really what's happening. It's not a market that is to the advantage of the consumer. It's a market that's to the advantage of the insurance companies and the employers. So there is going to be the opportunity or the chance of a flip side, which is to say that you just put Fitbits on every one of your workers. But people are already doing that in the US. They're not doing that in Europe because, again, our space is different. But people have been for the last 3-4 years encouraging that. And in the UK, we have insurance companies that offer you lower premiums if you go to the gym and if you wear a wearable device. So this stuff already exists, sadly.
It's existing. So as we draw to a close, then, thinking about the Internet of Things, thinking about the future we want, the future you're working towards, which is the creation of a certification mark to ensure, quote unquote, good behavior in the product community. Can you think about something on the positive side of the chain that you think could happen that would enable a better outcome for people in the year 2030, based on the work that you're doing?
I think, if anything, the average consumer is going to get very smart about the connected things that they might be encouraged to buy. They're going to require a level of privacy and a level of design that's completely different than what we have now. In the same way that we have been now used to buying appliances that are more, energy efficient, and we have this little rating where we buy a washing machine and we see that it's A, plus plus plus. It means that it's a better, more eco-friendly washing machine. We're going to have the same principles applied to connected products and connected device experiences. So we might get an A, triple star connected device because we know that actually the data goes nowhere. It's in a local hub or a local server that's in the house, and it's just used for the family because it's somehow related to security, related to health. Whereas if you buy something that's D-rated, you know that there's a chance that it's being sold on to advertisers and it's being sold on to third parties you have no idea about. But people will make decisions on that basis, and you should, of course, always allow people to make the decisions they want to make. But right now, no information is really public enough. And so I'd like to think that in 2030, we can slowly build up a vocabulary with the average person around what they should be expecting, and we can build products that are, best practice.
And I want to come back to the question you raised at the beginning, so we don't leave it hanging out there. People know what you also think about this idea about AI diminishing jobs and retraining. How would you address that question in terms of how do we do things now that can enable us to, have jobs for people in the future?
I think we have to.
Can AI be used in a way that we still have jobs for the future?
I think we'll always have jobs for the future. We'll just have different jobs, just like we don't have candlestick makers anymore and, very little brickwork being done. We understand that things change. It's just that we have to help people along to that change. And that might mean that people, even in the legal sector and the banking sector, and people who think that they were going to, study economics to go into banking or study law to go into a particular type of law, have to rethink what role they might have. The role that they might take might be a role that is much more creative, that is much more about debate, about management, about working with others, about selling, about all the things that we're really good at as people. All of the jobs that exist out there that are basically data inputting and repetitive and really dull, they will change. They won't disappear, but they'll change. Just like people who, have cars now can use Uber to complement their income. It was never something that helped you complement your income unless you were a truck driver. And now it's sort of accessible to a larger group of people. So wealth and capital gets redistributed differently every time when new technologies come in. And I think that we have to think very laterally about what future we want to train people for, what future we want to retrain people for, and what competencies we think are really important. And I think the ones that make us more human, and most of our capabilities as people is in the people thing, right? It's in the connection that we can have as people. That's the most powerful thing we have to bring to the table. It's not just to be an accompaniment to a really mechanical system and a mechanical environment. We're really not very good at that. So to recognize that the workplace will move towards the competencies that people naturally have and we should be encouraging people to have, I think will be the future.
So, to end, tell me, are you optimistic, pessimistic, or my favorite word is neutralistic about this AI-enhanced human future?
I think I am optimistic because I see a lot of the conversations that people used to have in the 60s and 70s are coming back, and some really, really good thinking that we sort of left behind with the beginning of the internet are also coming back. People are talking more and more about ethics. They're talking more and more about the role that we have to take in recognizing biases when we see them and how that might impact what we build. So those things make me optimistic.
Well, that's it, folks. We have an optimistic Alexandra Deschamps SONSINO. Thank you so much that you could spend time with us, Alexandra. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Claire, for having me.
Folks, we have been talking to Alexandra Deschamps SONSINO. She is a designer working at the intersection of industrial design and technology. She is founder of DesignSwarm and Goodnight Lamp, both based in London in the United Kingdom. And more importantly, she has been organizing the London Internet of Things meetup, where they're working hard at creating a certification mark for connected products. We have been having a conversation on the future of AI. And thank you for joining us on Future Sense Now, where we explore salient ideas for sustainable futures. Remember, creating the future we want is our shared responsibility. So as we say in Jamaica, walk good and safe journeys.
You have been listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson, brought to you by the Futures Forum. For more, please visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Thank you for listening. Spread the word. Share the future.